Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fialka. Today's August 31, 2022. Want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Russell Steinberg. Is that the correct way to pronounce it?
That is the correct way to pronounce it. And I think I'm the one who's mostly wrong about everything. Okay, so we'll find out.
Well, kudos to Rob for naming his podcast that. I just hijacked it, and I like that you actually addressed it. He will feel honored that. Okay, so Russell, where in the heck you calling in from?
I'm calling in from a very balmy Los Angeles, California, where it's about, I think, 108 degrees right now. We're in the San Fernando Valley.
How cool. The first question is
Not cool.
not cool. What's the best thing for a human being?
The best thing for a human being, I don't have a pithy answer to that, but for sure is to live a life with purpose. Like the man said, Plato, the unexamined life is not worth living. So that's the most important thing for a human being, for me.
No, I love that you use the word purpose, and I'll just put it in the context of a couple days ago. Actually, you'll love this. Mahler's distant relative is a forest activist in Indiana, Andy Mahler. And he's really,
I didn't know.
He's a great person, and he's written 200 songs. He was the guy who married me and my wife. He lives on, it's amazing. And he brought up this thing the other day, which I don't ask people this anymore. I says, tell me the philosophy of your life in 3 words, all beginning with the same letter. And he said, partner, place, and purpose. And I was like, that is, purpose was a great way to start. So I love that. So Russell, what's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Yeah, I'm not good at favorite lists, but I do, one of the things I talk to a lot of people about music, Jerry, and what I do notice is people do receive things on different vibrations and wavelength. And it's no question for me that the auditory vibration is where I seem to be receiving most of my information. And so I respond most to sound and word and text and everything. I would say I wish I was more visual.
Yeah.
I'll go to a concert and people will comment about how everyone was dressed. I did not notice any of that. I certainly noticed what they played.
Well, dude, it's like a concert, duh, it's audio. So, yeah. But that's good. I am that too. And why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Why do they gather information? Well, it comes back to the purpose. We can't survive unless we're constantly having intended information. I think what's more important is what we do with it. Receiving it is just the beginning, isn't it?
That's very good.
I'm going to interrupt you because one thing I want to learn from you, I'm reading in your bio that you're very fond of the ideas of Marshall McLuhan, and understanding media is all about information and how it's received. And when I read that book, I just couldn't believe how prescient it was for our time in terms of information and what we do with it. Because he talked about living in a time like we are now, where everything is just super small bytes traveling at super speeds, and the danger of that is losing depth, losing comprehension, and all of that. And so when I think about the best way to receive information, it's not just only the best way, but how to perceive it in a way that will sink down and not just float on the surface. That's one of the things I think about the most with that question.
Dude, that's exactly what I'm after. When I do these interviews, I'm like, hey, I'm fine with people talking about the general surface level, but I'm trying to go deep sea diving and go deeper. And that's like what you just said was Marshall put in a small soundbite himself, because he used the things he was criticizing. He says, the future of the book is the blurb. Because it's like, you just go, what's this book about? And you look on the back, go, oh, that's what it's about. But yeah, we'll get into McLuhan and exactly what you said.
Yeah.
Another information question is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
I'm not the expert to ask about that, but from my point of view, I think we're built to bring in information, but we spend our entire lives developing tools on how to interpret that information and what to do with it. You know, I spend a lot of time now with talking to very beautiful, smart people about how to listen to music. And
Yeah.
one of the things we just had, I just had a guest I interviewed where he was talking about Leonard Bernstein's ideas about Noam Chomsky.
Yeah.
Is there a universal musical language that's analogous to our spoken language? And they came up with some kind of, for me, nutty conclusions, but I don't think it's nutty at all. I think there's definitely a way we listen. But when we do that, to take that information, and this is, I think, the most interesting part of it, Jerry, is that the question is, what are you going to filter out?
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's what we spend our lives doing, is learning to finally filter into particular information.
That was so well put, because universal language of music is Corla Pandit. You know this guy? He was in LA. Do you know this guy at all?
No, I don't.
Oh my
There's so
God.
many people I don't know, and I'm probably wrong.
But I mean, I don't want to go off on, but basically he played exotica, which is space age bachelor pad music, in LA for 6 decades. He was a black man who disguised himself as an Indian, and he wore a turban. And he's very new age and spiritual. Way before that happened, watch him on YouTube. You will freak out. Frank Zappa wrote a whole song about him, but it's an endless story of how he disguised himself. Because blacks couldn't. He was playing organ on TV on KTLA in the 50s, for 15 minutes. And it's beautiful. He would jam with Art Tatum, but he talked about the universal language of music. And actually, you anticipate a question we're going to get into, but a couple others. Do thoughts create emotions?
That makes me laugh, because I remember when, as an undergrad, we had a 12-tone composer who was lecturing to us, and we were all very new to contemporary music, and our teacher had just exposed us to 12-tone music, and it was I think the dissonance, that was a filter that we couldn't get beyond to hear a lot of the music. And he bristled, and he came in and he says, "You have to understand, thinking is feeling." And
he said that.
Yeah, that was his mantra. Thinking is feeling. He wanted us to understand that intellectualization is emotion. And I thought that was completely preposterous then. And as I've had much more experience now, I've learned that the two are very highly correlated. And I no longer see the huge separation of mind and emotion I used to see. And so I guess, my answer to your question is, again, it's not, I don't have a pithy comment. I think that's something that's worth spending a lifetime thinking about.
Yeah, but I'm not after pithy comments. I'm after exactly what you're doing. These are just jumping off points.
Yeah, I know. I understand. You don't
have to answer the question.
No, and they're wonderful, just like we were talking about information. I wanted to just kind of finish that thought. I'm highly trained music listener, as well as I write music. That's what I do. I write music, and so my filters and biases are so different than an audio engineer. If an audio engineer and I hear the same concert, we have almost an entirely different experience. And if someone is an opera lover, they're going to hear the Mozart symphony very differently than I am going to hear it. So I think that's one of the big questions is, since we all apply these different filters, is there a more universal container that allows us all to speak together? And that's, I think, one of the most interesting questions that I'm dealing with now, both as a creative artist and as someone who's trying to be an explainer in chief, so to speak.
Yeah. In Lily Tomlin nailed it. She said, reality is just a collective hunch. We think we know what the words that are coming out of our mouths right now, we are communicating. And believe me, I'm getting what you're saying, I think.
Yeah.
But it's like these words you're using, filter and bias, are so important, because the follow-up question to that would be, and I'll explain, in your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking or feeling beings? And just to add to what you said, thinking is feeling.
Mhm.
Feeling and thinking, you can't separate them,
Mhm.
but we think we can because we invented the words. So that composer said, thinking is feeling, and you were like, ah, and then it took you years to go, well, maybe he was right.
He
So
definitely had a point. But I would say to your question, I think especially as I've observed the political landscape in the last 6 years, I think in terms of which part of us is in control, I would say it's not thinking. That part is not
right,
the one in control.
right. And so fill in the blank, Russell. I don't know what I think until
I don't know what I think until I. Oh, that's a really good one. Well, it used to be until someone tells me how to think, but it's certainly not that. I think my answer is I don't know what to think until I feel the opposite. Once I can feel the opposite and know, then I can come back to where I was. And I
That
think
is
that's.
so heavy. So I got it from McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it.
Mhm.
Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. And this is amazing because McLuhan's line, I just
Mhm.
told my friend today that's amazing is carefully make plans, then do the opposite.
That's more what I found because I'll just, just a kind of plebeian example. I remember when I graduated, when I was an undergrad at UCLA and I graduated, and that's, when you know the world perfectly and you're so certain. And, I remember I had very strong beliefs, especially politically one way, and also beliefs about academia and all these things. And, I remember revisiting those when I became a professor. At UCLA, and I just realized it was all BS. I mean, I started to realize that the actual original thoughts I had were so minuscule, and that everything I was so convinced was my opinion had been implanted in me. And I think that's one of the most terrifying realizations of adulthood, don't you?
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then, uh, and then
Well,
because you
and
start to realize you've attached to things that were not your own, and you were unaware.
yeah. And we're all in flux. So can humans think without language?
Can humans think without language? No, they cannot think without language. But the question is, what is language? And
Yeah.
that gets back to the Chomsky Bernstein question. And I think one of the interesting things about language that I was learning from that discussion is that 90% of our use of language is internal, not
Yeah.
external.
Yeah.
So I didn't understand that, but it makes a lot of intuitive sense to me now that language is not just a tool we use to communicate with others, it's the tool we use to communicate with ourselves. And was this something that McLuhan talked about? Because this is a new.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get into this heavily, and I don't want to do that right now. The internal thing you just said, but you must have ESP, Russell, because you anticipated the next question perfectly.
No,
Chomsky, no, listen, Chomsky said a language is not just words;
yeah.
it's culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down?
That's a very good way to describe that part of my life that has been about helping people who listen to classical music understand it better. Because
Yeah.
they all come back to me. I just wish I understood it better. I just wish my parents didn't make me quit clarinet or whatever it was,
Yeah.
and everything. And what I realize that's missing is the set of expectations that comes with fluency. And I think I'm very sensitive to that because I myself had to learn those expectations. And I always was playing this game of Emperor's New Clothes. Was it really there? Is that really there? And after I can only answer it now, and for music, I can't answer it for other fields. But I've really learned to separate. I think satisfactorily for myself what is Emperor's New Clothes and what is actually there. But like you said, that doesn't happen until you start to get a fluency with language. And
Yeah, that's
very.
pattern. McLuhan used it, got it from a ad campaign. Pattern recognition leads to comprehensive awareness. You
Yeah.
have the big picture view of classical music because you've studied the patterns.
Yeah.
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 So, two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
You know what? I don't know if I have I think all of my religious experience that has convinced me I really can't answer that.
Oh
I
my.
really cannot answer that. But I think the concept, the way I've made peace with that idea of the soul is one part about experiencing life is really realizing how much you don't know about it. And
Yes.
if we're coming those images from the Webb telescope that are we're being showered with, they're just a huge dose of awe and humility, that
Yeah.
there's little of the show we're really aware of. And
Yeah.
the feeling part, the soul part, is something I think we spend our lives wanting to be in touch with more and more.
Yep.
So that's the only way I can answer that.
Beautiful. The second Turing question was, can machines think?
Well, I'm certainly reading a lot of articles about that. Well, the question is, am I talking to a machine or I'm talking to a human being? Do I have a way
That
of
is
knowing?
a great question. We are in the discarnate state. We are both without bodies, but it sure looks like you're right in front of me and I can hear you loud and clear. So,
I
do
think your
you
algorithm is really sophisticated.
how many dots per okay, do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I think that those two are entwined. Happiness for me comes out of meaning. It's the pursuit of meaning, I should say.
Yeah.
I don't think I would be able to live a happy life if I wasn't pursuing meaning. And for me, as a composer, it's very simple. When I get that critical energy up to that level where you start to make all these kinds of creative connections in a piece or something I'm looking at, that's where you feel most alive. And that's happiness comes from that. And it comes from that in relationships and everything else as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we actually creating it?
The guest I had on 2 days ago was a rheumatologist, Dr. Patrick Whelan. He was talking about those kinds of ideas, and I feel completely, completely insufficient to answer that. But I will say that one of the most important books I've read in my life was Gödel Escher Bach by
Yeah.
Douglas Hofstadter,
Oh, yeah.
and that book was such a revelation in terms of experience. It's a very difficult. There's only two books that have almost challenged me to skip through them. One of them, both of them, I imagine very well. One is James Joyce's Ulysses. That was
Yeah.
one of the greatest challenges I had to get through, and that was a recent experience. But Hofstadter's book was also. They're both equal length, in fact.
Yeah.
Was also a great challenge. But one of the great delights of the Hofstadter is you don't understand where it's going until the end. And then you get to the end, it's a revelation that all of these mental gymnastics he's put you through as you're dealing with a kind of musical view of the universe, a graphic artist view of the universe, a philosopher mathematician view of the universe. You realize that the whole thing was about the origin of consciousness and his
Wow.
idea of how consciousness arises from very, very simple things that get iterated. And in those iterations, each time there are flaws and unexpected things. And it's those unexpected things that create, he called them strange loops that create
Oh,
consciousness. And I think that that's the best description I've encountered yet of what you're talking about.
thank you so much because Russell, I went up to Ray Bradbury once and I said, have you ever read Finnegan's Wake? And he goes, I've got it on my shelf. What should I
No.
do now? And I said, contemplate it. So I've looked at that Escher Bach book on my shelf for 43 years. And I always go, and you want the book to come into your head and not pull it down actually. So thank you for doing the cliff notes on that. Now at a cocktail party, I can act like I know
Okay.
what I'm
I
talking
won't.
about.
Okay, I got big bucks for that. Okay, well, that came from a lot of blood and sweat. But it
Yeah.
gets back to your other question. What makes happiness is pursuing meaning.
Yeah.
And that's certainly what he was doing in that book.
That's beautiful. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
That's a funny question.
That's
How long did you think of these questions? Yeah,
I've collected them for 40
yeah.
years. It's not, I'm
Okay.
not, there's
That
some
one
original.
deserves a pithy response, which I can't give. I don't think I have anything meaning to say about that. All I can tell you is that I'm a tortoise in all ways, so I'm not fast on either of those. I think my story of my life is playing catch up.
Well, listen, man, that's slow culture is what we need now. It's like
Yeah.
fast is it's way too fast for people need to take a breath and slow down, I
It's
think.
my mantra for the world is that we are worldwide and 1 inch deep. And
Yeah.
that's my so when I read McLuhan, I thought, oh my God, it was way beyond me. He got that. But I think it takes a lot of energy and resistance to be able to go into depth with something because, like you said, the speed of everything is so fast, and that's what understanding media it was so much
Yep.
about was the speed
Yep.
of light, as you say, the speed
Yeah.
of information. That the speed itself would be the object and purpose rather than what it was communicating.
Yep.
That's why the medium is the message,
Yeah.
and that's I think I've spent a lifetime struggling with that because it was never satisfactory. The problem with getting to a place just to get to it is that then the only thing you can think about is getting to the next place.
Totally. It's like Louis Buñuel says, I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it. Yeah, that's a cute saying,
Great.
and nobody challenged it. Most people go, "Oh, I agree with that." And one guy challenged it, and he says, "That's bullshit because I'm going to seek things that I want to get to."
Mhm.
And so I followed up with the question, if the journey is more important than the destination, why do we have to name or seek a destination?
Well, I think it's like the reason you haven't been able to read Gödel Escher Bach is that no, I'm very serious. If you don't have a reason to have to get through it, what's to impel you to do it? Yeah, I'll tell you. I conduct the Los Angeles Youth Orchestra. This is another thing
Yes.
I do, and that has been an interesting. It's been an amazing journey for me because first of all, I never wanted to do it. I'm a composer. I'm not a conductor. I don't particularly think I'm great with large groups of people, but it has changed my life in that it took me out of my ass in many ways because suddenly my story wasn't as important as the story of all of these people collectively. But one of the interesting things, Jerry, I tried to do, I didn't like the competitive part
Yeah.
of music. One of the things I love about music as opposed to sports is you don't win by beating somebody. At least you shouldn't. You win by collaborating with someone where together you all raise yourself up. But we have these things, pesky things called seating auditions. And you have all these violins sitting in a section, and if you've ever owned pigeons, you know that they may all look like they're copacetic, having a good time, but with pigeons, the main thought they have on their mind is who's ahead of me and how can I take them over, and who's behind me and how to keep the person behind me from taking me over. So I wanted to get away from all that one time, and so I thought, let's just get rid of these seating auditions. It causes nothing but grief and tears, and we'll just rotate the sections. Everyone will have a chance to be up in front and everything, and we'll all work together. And that was my that was my communist beginning and end, because I found quickly what happened was people stopped practicing. There was no
Oh,
reason to practice, and
oh
so
my.
so we
Wow.
couldn't lift any energy up because they all sounded like crap. In other words, they need to discover a purpose to go on that journey to get in front of that music stand and not do 1,000 other things they would have liked to do. And so I think that's how I understand purpose. So I reinstituted seating auditions, despite the fact I hate that we need the competition to do it. I think there's people, perhaps like you and me, who get motivated not by the competition, but perhaps through just this insatiable curiosity. But
Yeah.
with many people, that's they need something more tangible and immediate.
So really touching me deeply, Russell. I'm serious because this is Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Because I sometimes bring up competition. I will ask people, are we hardwired for competition?
Yeah.
He said this amazing thing. Games were created not to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, you don't know who really won or lost, but you can tell who is a hero and who is not. So it
Yeah.
brings up this other
That's
thing
beautiful.
from winning and losing. You
Mhm.
can lose in today's world, but still be a hero.
Yeah.
So what are we striving to be? You know, the guy who's sitting up front at the orchestra, or the person who's actually playing the music with their heart and
Yeah.
soul. And
Yeah.
it's, that was
That's
really,
that's one of the most important conversations I think that needs to happen today,
yeah,
especially after we've had, so many political years now that the winner is all that matters. The winner
that's it.
takes all and
That's it.
everything, and that's a poison for both sides, as we've seen.
Yep.
It's a toxic point of view.
Yep. Audre Lorde, the poet, says you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded and said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
you know that question immediately makes me think of a piece I wrote recently called Bach's Vortex, and
Uh-huh.
it's a piano piece that is obsessed with 8 measures of the very last fugue in Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier. Bach understood the tonal system, the musical system that kind of was the structure of all classical music from 1600 to 1900. He understood it better than anyone. And what is fascinating in his music is you get to these places where it falls off the rails continually. And this is one reason Bach as a composer was not admired very much during his lifetime, because he understood the system so well. He could use the tools in it to exploit its weaknesses and actually completely destroy it. And so one of the great joys I have now of listening to Bach is understanding how he takes things right, it's like shooting up in the atmosphere past where you can even breathe. And then just before you die, he brings you back down. And that's one of the great cathartic experiences of listening to Bach. And so he uses those tools. And what's interesting, the reason I call it Bach's Vortex is because when he gets to those places that are just outside the atmosphere, suddenly, and for a moment, it doesn't sound like Bach. It sounds like Richard Wagner or Arnold Schoenberg. He's literally in a musical world, over 200 years from where he is now. So, and completely aware of it. And so that ability to use the tools within a system to understand how if you truly command them, that the tools are in there for its destruction as well as its construction. And I think that's the deepest level I've discovered, the deepest level of learning any field. When you can actually understand what it's meant to the point you can bend it away. It was done in a really humorous way in The Matrix, the movie The Matrix, where, the little kid says, well, if you just understand the fork's not there, the fork can bend, because, it's like understanding the rules of something, to bend it away. And I think that's, I think when we look at the masters, that at least the fine arts I love, whether it's Shakespeare or
Yeah.
Picasso and all of that, you see this tremendous ability to play with those tools to the point where they go to incomprehensibility and then back. And that seems to be what it's about. The really great artists are constantly pulling things almost to the breaking point and back, and the very talented artists are just playing with them and exposing them really, really well. I remember, I'll use a pop music reference for you, Jerry, because I know so little about it. But I saw a documentary on a rock group called the Eagles.
Yeah.
And I didn't even remember. I remember one of the people in that group was very humble and said, well, we didn't do anything revolutionary like the group we imitated, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. But what we did, we just did it as good as, we think we probably did it as well as it could be done.
Yeah.
I love that statement I thought that was a very authentic statement, because it was a realization that, the next step in the art is to create something that then can allow you to pull things in a way that you wouldn't have imagined.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That leads perfectly into this question. Iggy Pop said, My band was so bad at imitating the Rolling Stones, we invented punk rock. So it's similar, but
Yeah.
it's almost the opposite. They were so bad, but they did push it and said, well, maybe we've been so.
You know, that reminds me, I just heard a podcast of Malcolm Gladwell, who is now so
Yes.
popular. And
Yeah.
he made an observation that I haven't heard before that was really really important. He was talking, I'm going to be sharing it on one of my hangouts that I have in my consortium, because he was talking about the danger of being a prodigy.
Yeah.
Because one of the problems of being a prodigy is that so few prodigies really end up becoming artists. And so he's talking about that, the people who come to things slower sometimes are the ones who end up having to say things, because the prodigy is someone who can speak perfectly the language, can master the tools very quickly, but a prodigy doesn't
Yeah.
really know the meaning of the tools, so they can't take them
Yeah.
farther. So then people said to him, well, here's an example that proves you wrong. Mathematicians. Everyone knows that a mathematician or physicist does their best work in their early 20s, or whatever, as a prodigy, so to speak. And he said, well, that's a different order of it's a different order of problem. The reason they're able to do that, and this gets to your Iggy Pop reference, is that that field is something that has so many rules and tools that the only way a breakthrough can come through is with a completely fresh perspective. And so he was saying the reason they do their best work then is that their realizations, when they've come to something without having the burden of having to have so much knowledge and perspective about it, allows them to see something in a new way. So maybe that's what Iggy Pop was saying. They hadn't really had to spend enough time to master the style of the Rolling Stones, so they were able to see it in a fresh perspective. I think that's really interesting. And I wish this was something people had talked with me about when I was a younger student, instead of feeling all the time that I'd missed the boat. I think that would have helped.
Russell, this is amazing because Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than we're taught to overcome a weakness. So tell me a weakness that you turned into a strength.
Yeah, finally, this is the first easy question you've asked me. Finally, I really feel I can talk to about, because boy, I'm all about my weaknesses. So I will tell you, I think more beautiful than that, my master teacher at Harvard University, who changed my life, was one of America's finest composers, Leon Kirshner. And I just, I assisted him for a long time, and just was constantly goading him to tell me more things, because he was just this fountain of knowledge that was inexhaustible. He studied with Arnold Schoenberg and Igor Stravinsky and Ernst Bloch, and he was a great philosopher. He dealt with all the scientists and historians at Harvard. And one of the great things he taught me was the concept of the divine flaw. And I tell this to all of my students, because this was really my savior as an artist. He talked about the fact that if you have a weakness and you truly study that weakness and you work at it the way that an oyster works on that grain of sand, he says that becomes your greatest strength. And he says you see this continually. And he says that this is the divine flaw that you must seek in your life's purpose. And so I certainly took that to heart. And I think that's a really good description of my life, because as an artist, I really deal with problems with structure. That's a big weakness of mine. I come up with ideas very, very quickly, but it's not like Mozart, where, Mozart talks about having an idea and then he has dinner and he goes for a walk and then he's just humming along, and the piece just forms itself. And he talks to a donor about this, who gave him a whole bunch of wine and wanted to know how he writes. He says, I'm just whistling on, and then suddenly I see it perfectly as a picture. And once I see it as a picture, I never have to, I'm done with the piece. So when people see me writing, I can have a conversation with someone. I'm merely dictating from the picture I see in my head. That is the opposite of, of my talent. And so that my divine flaw, or my flaw that I'm working to make divine, I should say, is the fact that I don't see that way. So I've had to overcome that with all kinds of inventions and tools and struggles to be able to tell fuller stories. And to the extent as a successive approximation, I see myself being able to do things with that. I think it's not a divine flaw yet, but it's definitely getting diviner than it started.
So beautiful.
I'm going to give you a specific example.
Please.
One of my recent pieces is a collaboration with a fantastic artist from New York called Jerry Kearns. And Jerry Kearns has dealt with some fascinating ideas about, you were talking about heroes, about our American hero mythology. And his artwork all explores the idea that the heroes that we've had in our lives, have not worked out for us. In other words, our admiration of the lone gunslinger or the super street smart detective or the buffed action hero, all of these things which we've seen play out in our American persona have actually led to just horrible, horrible things in the world, but horrible things inside of ourselves as well. And we become diseased from that. And it was for me, who has a difficult time with structure, to come up with a musical structure that would put that into some kind of musical meaning was a real challenge. And it took me a year or two to do that. But I worked and worked, and I had to use other media to do it. I used my own crayons to do it. I wrote poems. I stomped around. I tried to envision all these things. And then eventually I came up with a way to work that out with music, with his paintings projected behind it. And so I came up with a structure of three tableau, I guess. First one was about the Wild West. And then the second one was about all the action heroes. And then the third was the repercussions of all of that, which I called Into Night, taking us into our present, 9/11 and all of that, how all of this has resulted in just, a kind of apocalyptic world, which I think we all acknowledge we're in right now. And then musically, that led then to other discoveries. How do I deal with the artist's masterful use of collage? Well, I learned that from Charles Ives. I could put 24 different American folk songs and cowboy songs on top of one another. I could have the piano imitate galloping horses, without having to see horses, look at them. And so I'm just giving a specific example where, I had to gnaw at that. Unlike Mozart, who could just have one dinner and see that in his head, and he has Marriage of Figaro. I had to really work at this in the most with the crudest tools possible. And so that was my flaw. And yet when I look back at it, that's something that has a lot of meaning and purpose to me for that. So that's a very long answer.
No, but that was really beautiful how you put the words together and made it clear to me. And I feel you communicated it really well and evoked Jean Cocteau. I wonder if your teacher knew this quote. Is Jean Cocteau said, the first thing you do, like your first symphony or your first painting or your first piece of art or book, take whatever your family and friends and your teacher and your critics say, the criticism, take the criticism of your first piece and exploit that for the rest of your career. And I mean, it doesn't ring completely true with what you're saying, but it is interesting how we're not, that's the bad part. You need to improve this, you need to get your structure faster or whatever. But this is funny because I'm glad you brought up McLuhan before I did. That's a real treat for me because he learned from a poet that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we can learn to cope with what we don't like about the inventions. So I asked you the same question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Let me. That's really that's very deep. Before I get to that, let's go back a little bit to your Cocteau. Uh,
Yeah,
this idea about, it is a funny thing, and I'm sure you feel this way too. We're very bad at remembering praise, but boy, we remember verbatim every word of criticism we receive. And I think that quote comes from that, because we have no choice but to pay attention to criticism. And why is that? Because those of us who are serious artists are incredible internal critics. In fact, one
yeah,
of the biggest problems we have with our lives is that we take this, right? We take this amazing critical tool we've developed to hate ourselves, and then we project it out to the world. That's one of the things that we need to develop tools to channel more healthfully. But I think that's true. I certainly resonate to that, Jerry. I want to say, because I do think the criticisms I've received, I can't think of a single serious criticism I've received that hasn't caused me to percolate for years
oh,
about.
totally. I just got two on this. The guy goes, everybody praises my interviews, and then I love it when finally someone says, dude, they were from left field and they were silly. And I was like, thank God somebody's, paying attention, because I know some of them are silly. But it is like Cage said, it doesn't matter what the critics say, it's how thick your press kit is.
Well, I
If you
certainly don't have a thick enough press kit. That is what my answer to that is. But I definitely don't welcome the criticism, but I can't help but think about it. And
right.
and there's no question that it's like throwing a rock in a pond. That those critical ideas then resonate through all the future work you do, because the next piece I write, I'm saying, oh, am I doing that same thing again? Am I also stuck doing something that sounds too static here? Is
Yeah,
this too long again?
yeah,
And I think that's so important, because I think you and I both know and run across many artists in many fields who we wish did ask those questions more.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So okay. Now you want to get to something really deep. I remember reading this in Understanding Media, this idea of the artist as an antenna,
yeah,
and then you're asking, why doesn't the world pay attention to the broadcasts of
yeah,
the antenna? I think before that, one of the things I don't remember reading in McLuhan, but it's something that fascinates me, is that it, when you take the most vital creative artists of any time, there is an energy. You were talking about soul earlier, and I can't speak to that, but I know when I am in a creative mode, I am in an energetic field that I can't put my finger on, but I'm making connections at a rate and in a distance that I normally can't make in regular life. And I do get the sense that other creative people are either I don't know if the word is tapping into it or at that same place. But one thing you do notice with creative artists is that great ideas do seem to kind of emerge simultaneously, right? And it's very eerie, like UFO sightings. And and that there's something. It happens so often, it doesn't seem accidental. So this idea of McLuhan that we're antennas, I think there's something very very powerful about it. And I guess it makes sense, because if you're truly in a creative mode and that's what you're spending your time doing, you are sensitive to everything around you on a different wavelength than you are just receiving the surface of information. But as to why people don't receive it, you mean you're talking about in terms of Cassandra's not being adhered, not being listened to? In what
yeah.
sense?
It's sort of why do we ignore? But it is a poet, Ezra Pound, who taught Marshall that, and then he ran with it, was saying these hidden. Well, actually, Pound articulated it, these hidden psychic effects enable us to learn to cope with what we don't like about the inventions. So
Mhm.
you can say, I love Facebook or I hate it. It doesn't matter. You live in a Facebook world
Yeah.
and you're trying to cope with what
Yeah.
you don't like about it, but there's maybe things. So it is like, it's a juggling act. And, most people, I'll just tell you, Russell, most people go, because they're afraid, they're too busy. But I mean, there's a million reasons why we ignore it. but
Mhm.
it is like fear. Who knows? It's endless, you know.
This artist who I've been collaborating with is such a case in point. His artwork in the '60s already portended everything that's happening with us now. He
Yeah,
already was mashing things together, and because he was already seeing everything just coming undone.
yeah,
And so his figures already weren't touching the ground. They were already kind of levitated. And his figures, uh, all his characters in his artwork are never facing each other. They're not actually receiving information from each other. They're all emoting in a different way. So I'm sorry, that's my piano. He was seeing that already early. And, no, is it that, it's not that so much that people aren't paying attention, but maybe they don't have the tools yet to receive it. And
yeah,
I think that's, I'd like to say that I'm one of those people who I think don't have, also I'm acutely aware of how I'm not able to see things until I have the tools to receive it.
yeah,
And, whether, uh, like let's take global warming, climate denial as a great example. I mean, part of it is growing up in a particular, whatever culture you grow up in, that has a particular point of view, but a lot of it too is, do you have yet the tools to receive information in a different way than you expect it to be? And and how do you, and the real question for me, Jerry, is, and I wonder what you think about this, how do you let go of an ideology? This gets back
yeah,
to our, this
yeah,
gets back to this idea we were talking about earlier, where you think, for me, graduating college, you think all your opinions are your own. And when you really do investigation, you will find that almost none of them are actually your own. And I
yeah,
think that's, I think that's one of the reasons we're not able to, let's say, accept Marshall McLuhan's Understanding Media in 1962 until now 2022, because we had to overcome our ideologies first. And I think this is one of the things that concerns me the most. What do you think about that? How do
no,
you
I
get
like that. It is
overcome
good.
our ideologies?
Beautiful. It's you brought it up already. Filter and bias. These are key words, and bias is a key word in Marshall's studies. And they took seeing is believing a couple years ago, and they go, no, and now it's believing is seeing.
Yeah.
You only see the things you already believe. So you got to let go of them. So Marshall said, call it suspended judgment. And go back to math. He learned from Pascal, the mathematician philosopher. In order to understand anything, you have to know this end of the spectrum and that end and everything in between. It's like good luck, but you can study the patterns.
Yeah.
And so he said, understanding is not having a point of view. We're all going to have a point of view, probably. We're going to say this. And this is a question I'm going to ask you about. But if you're with one or more people,
Mhm.
try not to say, I love Facebook or I hate it. Say, how has it changed your life? And try to understand how it shaped your behavior. That's what it's done. It
Mhm.
shaped our behavior. So
Right.
how? And although there's services and there's disservices, and avoid words like that's good or that's bad,
You're
because you can.
cracking me up. I have to interject, because any of my listeners are probably laughing their head off, because my very first commandment of listening is you can't use the word, you can't use like or don't like.
That's great.
I
That's
s-
great.
and
That's
and
good.
the way I explain that, and it's incredibly difficult to
Yeah,
respond, for most people to respond to music without saying they like it or they don't.
yeah,
And
exactly.
I said, my point is that let's take you out of the music at the
Yeah,
beginning. Let's try to see if we can receive the music instead of you projecting yourselves onto the music. And I
yeah,
think, for me, that was, I have such empathy for how difficult that is, because when I was younger, I had the most difficult time with hearing atonal music, for instance. You
yeah,
know,
oh, yeah.
and when I first heard it, to me, it was just all plink, plink, plunk. And it took me, I had to get the idea, just get out of the idea, either I like it or I don't like it.
That's
And
good.
once I did that, magical things happen. I would start to hear a chord like this one
Yeah,
as something really marvelous. Maybe I don't like it or don't like it, but it was marvelous. It wasn't just I don't like it or I like it or not. So once I did that,
Yeah.
it changed me because I started to realize, oh, I'm not really listening to music. The music is having to have me on top of it, and then if it fits my expectation, then it's good. And I
Amazing.
realize now, turning that
Yeah.
around, I'm trying to help people enlarge the amount of music they enjoy by taking their projection off of it. And that's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard
It's
work.
hard, and it's exactly what Marshall hated TV, but he wasn't going to go and say it. He got his picture on the cover of Newsweek, the guru of TV, and everybody, you're a literature guy. Well, he didn't want to say good or bad. He wanted to say, get the big picture. And in your lonely teenage room, you can go, I hate Schoenberg, I hate Stockhausen. But when you're with one or more people, and the flip is, Russell, I rarely get someone who even brings up Marshall's name. And it's funny because mid-career, he's 40 to 80s, 20 books, mid-career in the 60s, when the medium is the message or the medium is massage hits, he updates it and goes, it's no longer that. Now it's the user is the content, which is the flip of what you just said, is that the user is the content. How you take it in. It doesn't matter how.
Doesn't matter.
When the artist creates their art, once they put it out, it's no longer theirs. They can do whatever, the user can do whatever they want with it.
Did Marshall talk a lot with John Cage? I don't know, because that's John Cage's point of view.
Marshall told Cage to go do Finnegan's Wake, and he also affected Duke Ellington. No, and Michael McClure took Marshall to his first rock concert, Bob Dylan, and Marshall says this real funny thing. So Marshall's definitely.
I love that.
Marshall said everything we do is music, which same thing Cage said. There was a lot of crossover. You're
right, because that's one of the frustrating things I had to deal with John Cage, because that's he came to Harvard when I was there, and he's very authentic in who he was, and that's not my experience of music. That we are the music, but I do find what I just wanted to finish. I finished that thought is that what does happen when you really take it seriously and you stop using I like or I don't like. What starts to happen is you get interested in something else, not whether you like or don't like something. You start, and the way I word it is, how is it wrought? How is it built? How is it put together? And this gets back to your thinking, feeling thing. But once you start to get a glimmer of that question, how is it put together? How is it wrought? Is it well wrought? Not well wrought? You can ask, or how does it work? You find that so much more elevating, so much more emotional a question, so much more engaging, so much more alive than just repetitively applying yourself, your user, you the user of the content, applying just looking at pictures of yourself on everything else. Once you let the light of something else come in you, I think it's a profound change spiritually and intellectually and emotionally for all of us, right?
Yeah. Well, that's funny, because I'm going to eventually, if I get to it, is what's the function of music? And John Cage said, my teacher told me that to make to soothe the soul, to make it susceptible for divine intervention. Now that sounds really new agey, but to soothe the soul, I mean, like calm down.
Who told him that?
Like Suzuki or some Zen guy, but to calm you down and feel what you said divine earlier, but to feel some intervention. What is this? But it's a perfect lead into two of my film heroes say, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. And you had your piano there and you were doing almost fake Cecil Taylor for me. Thank you. And Cecil Taylor says,
Cecil,
Cecil, as Captain Beefheart would say, Cecil said, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. So it's a stupid question, but just your ideas. Is art making, music making more self-expression, or more you're a vehicle for whatever culture, technology, environments are dominant?
I love that question because I've wrestled with it my whole life because it gets me so angry. Really angry. God, I get so angry with that question. Every time I hear an artist say, I'm not doing it, I'm just a vessel, it just comes through me. And then I often think to myself, well, whatever's coming through you, I wish it would stop. um, I don't. I think that's bullshit. But you know what?
Yeah,
It's bullshit. Like the question is it nature or nurture? You know,
yeah,
clearly there is a there's something to that. And
yeah,
there's no, I think every creative artist I've ever met and respected always will say, mostly what I do is just struggle and work in hell to get something together. But every once in a while, something just comes.
yeah,
And I don't know why it just comes. And so
yeah,
I do think that, obviously happens. But I also know artists who say that's the only way I write, I'm just this vessel. And I tend to notice with those artists that they don't create, they don't have an expression I'm interested in at all. So I think to what really, I think what really is more like it, you take in everything you can, right? And it takes years. It's not a prodigy thing to create meaning with that. That is the task.
yeah,
And then self-expression is the result of all of that
yeah,
work in doing that. And I think, I had we were talking about John Cage. I know about John Cage because my teacher and he were colleagues. Schoenberg told John Cage, get out of music because you'll never understand harmony.
yeah,
And which was probably a true statement. And John Cage had such a, kind of, you talked about criticism forming your life. John Cage's entire musical life came from that one piece of criticism, and he articulated it very beautifully. He said, well, if I can't do harmony, I'll find a way to make music with other things.
yeah,
And that led to his whole embrace of noise.
yeah,
He likes working with noise the best because it
yeah.
has the least expectations for musical expression. But the other composer, that one that affected me a lot, are you familiar with George Crumb, the great
I know
American
his name, but
composer?
I don't know. I should know his music, just his name. But go ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah,
George passed away this last year, and I think along with Aaron Copland and Charles Ives, uh, and maybe Samuel Barber. I think he's one of the four most important composers we've had in the United States. And he said something to me that was really remarkable on this subject. He said, I don't really think that you can be a concert composer, I'm a classical composer now, until you're 50. And he said the reason is that, back in the time of Mozart and Beethoven, by the time you were 20 or even younger, 15, you kind of knew every music that was out there. You knew everything that was being written, and you only listened backwards maybe 50 years. So you knew it all. You had plenty of time to absorb everything, and then you could create something meaningful. It had enough time to filter in you. But now, he said, you not only have to know all the music in classical music, you've got to know all the music from every genre. You've got to know jazz. You've got to know
yeah,
ethnic music. You've got to know pop music and electronic. And you've got to be able to go back in history 1,000 or 2,000 years, and you're expected to put all of this stuff together. And so he's saying, how could you possibly have anything worthwhile to say until you're 50? And
that's
I thought that was
he's a
phenomenal.
comprehensivist, and he's understanding the big picture and how things change. There's this list on some Zappa site of every song Frank's ever quoted. It's the most amazing list you'll ever see of the history of music, because he quoted Tico Tico and he quoted Stravinsky and then he quoted Louis Louis, and it's so vast in every genre.
Yeah.
But
How come we know all that, right?
yeah, and then why you put it? That's called scavenger composer. It's Copeland. No, it's Ives. It's Ives, Frank, and Carl Stalling. They're scavenger composers. They grab. But anyways, what you said was really important. But this vehicle thing, I love that you hate that, because people will say, yeah, we're vehicles, blah blah blah, and I love that. That's bullshit. That was beautiful. That's what I love, that you can give me your honest, because Ginger Baker, the drummer for Cream, he says, "How'd you get your drum sound?" He goes, "I was in London when they were bombing. Boom, 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 boom." And so that's a good statement, same vehicle.
Yeah,
But
that's the pithy answer, which I never
yeah,
come up with. Yeah.
the guy from Negative Land said, "Oh, Missy Elliott learned how to sing from car alarms."
Oh,
So she's living in the ghetto and learning how to sing, not from the radio, but from
yeah.
car alarms. So this thing, the hidden question there really is, can art making, music making, composing be egoless?
Be egoless. Well, again, I don't like the wording of that question, but I think it touches on something really powerful. I do think when you're, when you're working creatively, your ego does disappear. Ego is only something that comes out when you're not creating. It's afterwards, that all the people I admire then had these horrible egos. But when they were writing and doing their work, they're in what I call a kind of, the way I call it, the kind of celestial conversation of the for the ages. I feel when I'm writing music, I'm in conversation with Bach and Perotin and Handel and my teacher and everything. And that's the most beautiful part of it, is that you're part of this unbroken chain of fantastic conversation. And so there's no room for ego in the petty way we understand it. But as soon as that's over, then of course the stupid bestial thing sets in, and that person got this award, why didn't I? This person's getting this, I'm better than this. All that crap comes in when you're not doing the creative thing. And it's remarkable to me that it's just omnipresent in the greatest creators. And that to me is one of the big questions. How can that be, since they spend so much time in this elevated realm, that they then can be as such horrible people? The famous example in my world was that the two greatest composers of the 20th century, Igor Stravinsky and Arnold Schoenberg, were just kind of like, an enmity. They admired each other to a certain point, but there was just this just hatred that one of them was going to succeed in taking music the direction of music. And it was just to the point that for their students couldn't talk to each other. They would sit on opposite sides of the aisle in concerts and boo the other side. And that's the ugliest part of art, the bestial in it. And I think for me, so much of the creative pursuit and meaning is not spending less time with that part of the world, that part.
Yeah, and you touch on a couple of things. Charles Ives was smart. He had a good day job. He was an insurance salesman. He didn't have to worry about paying his rent with selling his music, and so then he could do whatever. And I heard a tape of Charles Ives, and it sounded like Cecil Taylor, and I went, "Wow,
he was probably the most experimental genius we've had in this country." But it's not that simple. He got a heart attack when he was 40 from working that hard, and it shortened his composition career. He lost the vitality to be able to create new things, and it's complicated. He spent his life very upset that he wasn't more recognized, and at the same time, he was so generous to help other composers, financially, and to support them. He's a very complex person that deals with those kinds of questions. Actually, it's good that you brought him up.
And then the other thing is, the ego thing was amazing. So I just started asking, can art making be egoless? Say over the last 10 years, 90% of people go, can art making be egoless? No, you got to have ego. Okay. But one person finally came along and said, good art is egoless. And I went, wow. And then over the last month, 2 or 3 people, what you said is it disappears. This person a couple of days ago said, it's gotta be egoless, so it's not even good or bad art. They just said it's got to be egoless. So that was interesting. Now, do artists have a moral obligation?
That's something I've been certainly talking to myself about, and with other people. I think they do, but clearly many artists don't believe that to be the case at all. Many great artists don't. And so I think that really comes, I guess, to a human predilection. I find it makes no sense to me to feel that you're living a purposeful life and to see things that are wrong around you and not to respond.
Yeah.
Uh, so to me, it's incomprehensible. The piece I've just finished now, the one I've dealt with it in a more abstract way. I mean, I just don't feel that the music I'm writing, I can't ignore what's going on, and so it doesn't have a specific program or story, but the title says it all. It's called Diminished Resistance. Diminished Resistance, and it's a pun on one, on the surface level, because it deals with what we call diminished seventh chords. And so what I've done, I've taken different diminished seventh chords and pitted them against each other. And you play them together and you get this kind of complex chord, and then they move towards each other in conflict. And they move out from each other. So I've used the structure to kind of express what I think is one of the big problems we're having right now in our world, but I've done it in an abstract way. I love two great artists that have influenced me enormously. Pablo Casals, the greatest cellist, and the greatest guitarist of all time, Andres Segovia. Both were from Spain. And Pablo Casals was a deeply moral and troubled person. And after the Spanish Civil War, he left Spain permanently in protest of Franco. And he never returned to it. And he always was performing, sticking up for it. Just like Yo-Yo Ma has taken on that mantle. I don't know if you're probably aware, during the Trump years, with the horrible things being done to immigrants, Yo-Yo Ma just flew down to the border and played cello right there at the crossing. I mean, just to make this powerful physical statement. But then there was Andres Segovia, who's one of the greatest artist I've ever known, and he worked with Franco. He didn't work with him, but he never expressed his politics, and he lived in an authoritarian regime and did not express himself that way. And that bothers me, but I have to, if I take my ego out of it and accept it, I see that there seem to be different feelings for the artists. But I would just say that I definitely respect the artists that do come from a moral place and aren't silent in the face of evil.
Yeah, no, that's truly touching, because Sam and Dave played Trump's inaugural, and it's like cringe. It's like they're black guys, they're struggling and they need the money. And then it's like, do you not say no to a gig? It's like, we're waiting for a gig here. Come on. That's separate the art from the artist. But a screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're composing?
I'm going to turn that around, to feedback on what we were just talking about, about should an artist be moral or not? The real question, perhaps, is not whether they should be moral, but what is their relationship with the community of mankind?
Yeah.
I think that's, there's some artists are monks, or ascetics, and they really reject the community of the world. There's been many that have been in retreat. I'm thinking of Conlon Nancarrow. Do you know Conlon?
Ooh, yeah, good. Tell me why.
Because here, one of the great geniuses of the 20th century, Conlon Nancarrow, was a composer who, well, actually, because he, for his political stances, embracing communism, he actually became an emigre, moved to Mexico, and spent his entire life writing music just for the player piano up in his attic. And he didn't expect anyone to ever even hear his music. And he was so surprised when, later on in life, some of the great luminaries like John Cage especially started to become enamored of his music and promote him and let the world know about what he was doing. But, there are other of us artists that really embrace the world and really feel that we're part of the
Yeah.
world community. And so I think in that sense, so you're saying, is it about the maker? Maybe the way to turn it around is like a rabbi said to me, God is not an external object, a maker. God is a verb, meaning go do good. And so in that sense, that in other words, God is then in the community, in terms of what are you contributing to the people in your community, the people in your world. And I think that is a very important thing for artists to
That's
think about.
beautiful. Yeah.
Does your music, it's a big question. Does your music only speak to the atmosphere on Mars, or does it speak to an audience? We were just discussing Richard Taruskin, the great preeminent musicologist who just recently passed away. And he talked about 20th century music. And he was saying, that to him, people thought he was disparaging John Adams when he said, well, John Adams is someone who's writing music for an audience. Whereas, Arnold Schoenberg was not writing for an audience. And it doesn't, but then he said people misunderstood me. It didn't mean that I didn't think John Adams wasn't an artist. It's just that he was identifying his music, he was writing it for a specific people, and as opposed to someone who's thinking in a different realm. I think we need both kinds.
We need both kinds. Russell, it's so good how you're saying this, because you anticipate the next question, you answered it. So
I exist to anticipate your next question.
Dude, I'm serious.
But for right now, I do.
The next question was, Marcel Duchamp said, there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your audience when you're writing your song? But let me just add,
I thought it'd be no art without a urinal. Are you sure? Right?
That is good. But Frank Zappa would say, I write this music for myself. If other people like it, that's all great. That's like romanticizing and denying that he knows he lives in a capitalist consumer world. And if he hits this note and says this word, kids will buy his music, then he can write more music, because all Frank wanted to do was write music.
Yes.
And make music. But he knew he could juggle this stuff. So that to me was romanticizing. So that intention. So it's like now you flip it to, what was the motive of the cave artists, meaning the cave musicians, the cave dancers, which we don't have record of, but for some reason we got these records of these people doing something, scribbles on a wall. But you're imagining, you don't have to be the anthropologist or Herzog or whatever, just your hunch. What was the motive of the cave music, the musicians?
Yeah. One of the most meaningful conversations I had with my mentor, Leon Kirshner, was we were striding across the Harvard Yard going to his home. And we were always, he was always talking about very modern music and modern ideas, but he also would talk about Schubert and other people. And in this conversation, I asked him about the Beethoven Ninth Symphony. Because you see, at this point, if you were in contemporary music, Beethoven's Ninth was just so, so it's like, it's like talking about the latest dinosaur footprints you uncovered. It just didn't have relevance. And he really surprised me. He goes, "Oh, the Ninth." He said, "Oh, that piece." And he said, "Well, there's three kinds of composers. There's a composer who's talented and really can master like you would say, the tools. And that composer speaks to an audience of other composers, and they'll appreciate that music. But then there's a gifted composer, and that composer understands the tools as well, but is able to express them in a way that not only the aficionados get, but the community around him understands. It speaks on that level." He goes, "But Beethoven's Ninth, the entire world understands that piece." And I thought that was that's always stayed with me, that, what it takes to, you were talking about universal language, to be able to come up with an articulation that is so full of its language and yet has an entry point for every single person in the world to get to. I think that's a very profound thing. And the reality is that like you're saying, different pieces we write are for different audiences, for sure. And I'm sure that caveman, or the cave woman had different audiences for the different art. Some of it was just for the accountant caveman, in the cave next door, or whatever. And others were really for something deeper. I mentioned to you that I think when my greatest joy sometimes in composing is when I suddenly feel, oh my God, I'm kind of in conversation with Bach and Haydn in this kind of unbroken thread going all the way up. And that's an audience that in one sense is dead, but it's also alive because I'm articulating that audience. At the same time, I do think a lot about what effect that will have, but not in a cheap way. It's like, is this something people will understand? Or I'll say to myself a lot, am I too full of myself? Well, how dare I ask people to sit this long? For that. I mean, I think those kinds of questions are very important, and they weren't asked for a long time in the contemporary world when music was kind of in this academic world. It was really just about pleasing, pleasing your colleagues or whatever. And I think we're long gone past that now. But I, on the other hand, Jerry, I think we also know the danger of trying to please everybody.
Exactly.
And there's so much art that stuff that passes off art that really isn't worth the time for that reason.
Yeah.
It gets subtle.
Yeah, that was beautiful how you had that time with Leon. And the thing is, Russell, you really knew, in my opinion, what questions to ask him. You were asking him questions. You had that connection with someone like that. I'm going to ask him questions. But it's like Vera says, James Brown wants me to play with him. He says, okay, go ahead. Geez, you got a job with James Brown. So he says, came back, he said, how was it? He says, oh, I learned his trick, man. He goes into every town and jams with the local musician, then steals his lick. And I goes, that's it. It's like T.S. Eliot. The mature poet steals and the immature poet imitates. And James Brown hit number 3 on Leon's list. It's the entire world. So they asked King Sunny Ade, would you grow up listening to? And he says, James Brown, the great, so it's an amazing thing. He learned that universality.
But we're hungry for the fast answer. Leonard Cohen, gave a talk about how, a secret of his music is it's all based on 6 chords he learned from a gypsy in Canada. And he had a few guitar lessons. Well, that's a nice story, but it's BS. The reality, that guy didn't learn by stealing, going to each town. He learned something by
no, you're right.
But the reality is art, we always want the easy answer, and art is not about the easy answer for me.
Right. That is so well put. You're right. And so I have to ask you, I asked for 90 minutes and we only got 13 more minutes. You got to go then. Can I get a few more minutes, or that's all right?
Sure. I just want to address what you said about my time with Leon Kirshner, because since I brought it up, but I was aware that my time with him was short, like our time with everybody is short.
Yeah.
And so it was really important for me to get as much, I knew how hard it was. I spent my whole life trying to find a teacher like that. Most people never do. And the other thing that I felt so privileged about was in studying with someone who had studied so deeply with Arnold Schoenberg, who had studied so deeply with Mahler and knew about Brahms, and Mahler knew about Brahms, and Brahms were good friends with Schumann, and Schumann, goes, you have this kind of unbroken chain going all the way back to the beginning. It's hard to get on that train. And once you do, you want to ask as many questions as you can, because you really have a very finite time, just as you and I have just this short 90 minutes to share a lifetime that we've both lived separately.
Beautiful. But I mean, literally, I have 10 more minutes. Then how many more can you go after that? Just a ballpark. I'm not trying to force.
I do have things I have to do. Let's just go for another 15 maybe.
Okay, 15. Perfect. So, my friend calls it the 3 T's of music: taste, technique, and theory. You learn how to play the piano. You know what chords you're playing. How does one acquire taste?
I think I don't know if taste is something you acquire. I think taste is something that matures and changes as you go. I imagine it's like food. You're not you don't suddenly just have the taste. It's something that matures as you go. But I will say that one of the biggest problems we have is mistaking taste for the substance of the thing itself.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I've tried to overcome when I work with people, I'm going to be teaching a listening class now on Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. Which and people have definite opinions. Even back in these old composers, oh, I love Beethoven, hate Haydn, or I love Mozart, I hate Beethoven, or back, that's their taste. And I think so much we use this word taste to really filter out everything that's wonderful about an art form, because so much it's again projecting our personal preferences at the moment. And what I'm going to try and do in these sessions on Zoom is get people so on fire about a taste they might not have acquired yet that they're going to suddenly it'll become their favorite thing. I once had a student who had high school student whose mother was a passionate musician, and the student was very bright, but she did not want to learn violin anymore at all. And she came into my class, and I had arranged, I had these high school students that couldn't really play much. And I didn't want, they make arrangements of, cute tunes, things that they think kids will like. And I had no intention of doing that. Instead, what I did is I made an arrangement of the first 5 Haydn symphonies, because no one knows them. They're written for very small ensembles. They're not played anymore in orchestras, but they're incredible pieces. And so I arranged this for our little chamber ensemble. And this young girl who didn't really care at all, for the music or playing the violin, she just got on fire when she was able to get to the actual source. And we were actually, with just like 9 of us, we were playing actual symphonies. And she told her mom, all I want to do now is learn Haydn and do this. And her mom was so ecstatic because her daughter was playing violin again, that instead of buying me, like most teachers, a tie or a pencil or some useless thing, she bought me the entire Groves Encyclopedia of Music. She was so grateful for that. But I think of taste, that way, is that, the real victories I've had, I think, talking with people, is watching their taste change. I have a notorious listener now who hates Bruckner with a passion. Bruckner, who writes these ponderous symphonies. So one of my great missions in life is going to be to get him to enjoy Bruckner. And I'm giving a talk at the Philharmonic on Bruckner this year. And so I'm going to try and do my best to change his taste. Anyway, I had to say that, get that off my chest.
It was really good. Russell, here's the next one. This is a McLuhan quote, and I'm just curious your reaction to it. Song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference.
Or dialect difference in dialects, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing how our taste and our judgments and our biases go through that. I mean, that's what we human beings are. We are, these terribly honed discriminators to anything that's different and out of place. And I guess maybe the role of the artist is to take that thing out of place, and instead of stomping on it, is to elevate it and celebrate it. That might be something we can learn from. I've been dealing with this question a lot recently about language, like we've been talking about. I like the idea of song being, did you say slow down speech?
Yep, that's what he says. Yeah.
Just yesterday, I gave a workshop. In my workshop, was dealing with this. I was talking about song structure, and that's why I don't have any difficulty understanding music's a language, because I talked about how songs are put together. And, there are different orders, as Douglas Hofstadter points out in everything. There's different orders to songs writing. There are songs that are very complex, that tell a full story, like Homer. They have a beginning, a middle, and end, but to quote Renoir, but not necessarily in that order. But, and those are very complex songs in music. But then there are the tunes we hear all the time. And those tend to be composed of not 3 things, a beginning, middle, and end, but of 2 things. The idea that you have something that can repeat and something that contrasts. And most of what we love in music especially in folk songs and pop songs, is about just whether we're hearing something and whether we decide it sounds the same or whether we decide it sounds different. And that's usually what we're subconsciously always doing. Just like when we watch a movie and everything, we're so honed to the structure, 3-act structure. We have expectations of what's going to happen in a film because it's so deep down in us. But if you go to the very beginning structure of songs, which is really recitation. And I started it by playing some Gregorian chant recitations. And you have this, Domini, and then a whole bunch more Latin going on forever, a whole bunch of things you got to do or else you're going to be burned in hell. And then, thank you, Lord. You have this cadence, which cadere from the Latin meaning to fall. And that cadence is so beautiful because it creates grammar. It creates a punctuation mark that separates it. And what I discovered, is that if you have a lot of content, a lot of spoken language, a lot of the conscious language to communicate, then the musical tones have to be very simple. And I compared that with Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone. Once you thought you was fine, but they were all kidding you. I'm sorry. It's doing exactly the same thing of chant. He's vomiting a whole bunch of words out there. And so the music has to be ridiculously simple because your focus is on the words. Now, when your focus starts to get underneath the words, then you have to use fewer words. And then the music can take fantastic shapes and take you somewhere like Puccini takes you or Bach takes you, because then the music is. So for me, it's a spectrum. I think spoken language and musical language for me are related, but they're on a spectrum. And then, the deeper you want to contemplate the meaning of the words, and that's poetry is of course, a slower type of speech. Unless it's hip hop, it's done in a way that, hip hop is a great example, right? Why is, people complain, oh, there's no tunes in hip hop. Well, if you're going to say that much, if you have that much to say and that much quickly, you can't have a tune. It'll take your mind off of it. So I do think a lot about music and language and how they are on a continuum.
What's more fundamental, music or language?
That's the point. It's a continuum. So it's not, a lot of people say, well, music is, Dr. Whelan was saying in our hangout, well, the idea of, is music a proto-language? In other words, is it something, language came out of music? I mean, obviously I can't answer that. If it really comes from that part of the brain, I don't know. But I do know the way we use it now is that it is a continuum. It is part of a communicated language. And just like if you study, if you've ever have you ever taken a course in body language?
No, but I understand what you're talking about.
You've ever heard the statistic that when we hear someone talk, that 90% of the information we receive is not what they say, but how they say it, and the visualization, how close they are to us, how it's delivered and everything. And so with that spirit of that, we can realize that music is really it's another type of expression of language. I heard it really expressed really beautifully too, that, Mozart is always sung. Mozart is singing to you all the time, no matter what instrument. But Beethoven is rarely singing at you. He's always talking to you. You think of Beethoven, that's speaking, right? That's clearly, there are words to that we don't know, and Beethoven he's speaking at us. So I think exploring that as a continuum is something I'm more and more sensitive to. Opera makes this really obvious, because when they have to tell the story, the music gets very simple. They can even call it patter or recitative. But then when they want to talk about the depth of feeling, that's when you get, that's when now
Yeah,
you're not trying to get lots of specific facts in. Now
yeah,
you're trying to talk about the depth of feeling. And so you have a
yeah.
depth of the words. That's how I,
Russell, this could go on forever for me,
yeah.
and I hope it does, but I just got a couple quick ones and we're out of here. How do
Thank
you
you.
find peace? How do you find peace of mind?
Ah, how do you find peace of mind?
I'd say hugging my wife's a good way.
That's good.
Cuddling, cuddling, but by riding my bike in the morning, breathing. Yeah,
I think making time for that
yeah,
is a study that I practice, just like I practice playing my instruments or practice composing, and it's continual. For
yeah,
me, the beach is where I get my serene place. So
good. Yeah,
going to the beach is important. I've created in my studio. I call my studio Blue Pool after my favorite little hidden grotto in Maui that inspired me so much. And so I try to surround myself with fountains and things. I do meditation like other people. I get peace of mind by also enjoying other art. I think that's so important. And so,
nice.
enjoying visual art, enjoying poetry, reading literature, all of that is peace of mind too. And as you said, the other way of getting peace of mind, I wonder if you have discovered this too, is working to make sure that the people in my life are authentic and care.
Yeah.
And rather than, to surround myself with people who are healthy, that's I think one of the most important things I'm learning about having peace of mind. And I don't think that's easy.
It's not easy. It's beautiful aspiration. And I got to tell you this Apple the ocean is the ultimate solution.
So
And it,
Frank and I felt the same.
yeah, it was cool. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Yeah, it's funny because I was just looking at papers. My mother just gave me all kinds of papers from my early life, and so uh, I think I don't think I have anything profound that other people don't say often. But just that to tell my 12-year-old path that it doesn't seem like it, but I'm on the path I want to be on.
Good.
That's the hardest thing, because you spend so much of your childhood feeling you're not living the life you should be living. And I think maybe more than my 12-year-old self, this is probably something other people haven't told you, I'm going to guess. I would wish I could have spoken to my self 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Because when I went through that crisis of not having achieved everything that I just assumed when I was 12 years old or 15
Yeah.
years old I was going to achieve, and I wish I could have told myself that 15 years ago that was not what the point of the whole thing was.
Yeah.
It really was not the mattering. That I came to a realization that it wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about achieving certain milestones. It was really about what I was able to produce. And
Yeah.
that was, I'd say, the most profound realization I had personally, because it gave me peace of mind when I had that, and also gave me a very clear direction in terms of what I needed to do. Have you
Yeah.
found that yourself?
Well, you're a real hero to me because you're a listener. You really listen deeply. And that someone said that's the key to music. And I want to constantly revamp my questions and reword them and change them. But I have this script that I can rely on. And I love it when people say something like you just said. Well, how about 12, 22, 32? There's other ones, but I just stuck with the 12-year-old. But but wait, what was your question to me?
No, that's
Did that,
well. We always have plans. Yeah. No, my question is whether you too have found, some of those realizations from what you had expected of what how you envisioned and imagined yourself early on, achieving, as opposed to the life that you've created.
yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to think. No, I'm going to go to John Cage. That's a very good question, Russell. I wouldn't want to ruin it with an answer. No, I would say,
Very
yeah,
funny.
I would say,
I didn't think of that answer, by the way, that you just gave.
yeah, but I would say I was too busy doing to think of what I was striving to get to or my aspirations were. I've never I like people say, "What do you do?" I say, "I do nothing effectively." And so, I mean, it's just
Yeah,
smart
smart
assy
people.
questions, but it's
Yeah.
also there's depth there and it's deeper. It's like I don't know what my aspirations were in my life because I was always doing music, art, film, poetry, everything, and it's still that. But I
Mhm.
think these kind of conversations are something that I guess I never would have
Mm.
thought I would get to, but the first audio cassette I have ever was me asking my dad about what did he dream. So I guess I
Oh,
got
really?
that in that that urge to ask questions from my parents.
Mm. Well, that is
Yeah.
so important. Well, I certainly just want to tell you, more than your questions, I've really enjoyed all of the great minds that you've brought into our conversation
Well,
with the
thank you.
quotes, because it certainly elevates me to think of things in new ways, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. And I wish we could and I hope we can continue and do more, but just a couple more if you have time.
You really
What's
you have to get through this list, don't you?
Mhm. Well, no, I mean, dude, I dropped a whole section, and that's all right. But
Good.
but
I count myself a success if I get you to drop a lot. Good.
yeah, but no, I told this great thinker once. I says, I don't want you to use your stock lines. I'm trying to break you out because I've studied your stock lines for 20 years and they've changed my life. I love them, but and she goes, then drop your script. And I was like, but what's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
What's happening today both inspires and uninspires me. I
Yeah,
think I told you that the part that doesn't inspire me is this idea of McLuhan's speed is all that matters thing.
yeah,
Because I think what's bad about this, and I think you're seeing it, is nothing has a chance to develop teeth.
yeah,
We as soon as something is established, it's immediately repeated, and then we move on and we get
yeah,
tired of it. And so it creates this terrible hunger for anything that matters. So that's
yeah,
the part I don't like about where our culture is going, because you see it in all the in the repetitiveness. Let's say in the TV shows, the inevitable sequels and
yeah,
sequels and sequels and prequels and prequels. And that need for that comfort is there, but it disguises a deeper hunger for
yeah,
something. But I'll tell you what I do think is so marvelous about being alive right now in our culture. We do have the tools to be aware of things of a wider range of
yeah,
articulation and ideas than ever before. I'll tell you, you're live broadcasting this on YouTube, and I think YouTube is one of the most profound changes in my personal life personally, because I can look for any kind of music I
yeah,
want to find, and I can find something about it. Although I'm very happy that I bring a structural background to it.
yeah,
Without that, I don't know if I would have the filter to be able to find gold all the time. I
yeah,
think I would have fool's gold all the time
yeah.
and not realize it. So
That's
because
good.
I have that filter, I'm able to find a lot of great things. And I think that's powerful. The studio I have where I'm able to use electronics and to create all kinds of sounds is so powerful.
Yeah,
And so the tools we have, the fact that I'm able to do all this without being the most, one of the most famous people in the world, or without having to have a record company behind me, or all these
yeah,
other things. I think that part of being alive now is fabulous. The fact that I can talk with someone like you, just one-on-one, where we had like 1 degree of separation through a friend, that
yeah.
is what makes living now so incredible.
Yeah, and kudos to the great John Bishop for
Yeah,
connecting us. So
he
Thornton
is.
Wilder said in 1928, art is confession. Art is the secret told, but art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this, Russell. What's it really all about for you? I'm glad
Yeah,
you're cracking up.
well, first of all, that's such a beautiful quote, and again, that's of a time when people really knew their material and
Yeah,
really could have secrets.
Yeah.
And and that's very true. There was, in the Renaissance, there was the secret art, chromatic art of the Netherlands, and the music looked one way on the page, but unless you had grown up and studied with the right teachers, you didn't know the changes you needed to make to the notes to make it that to make the piece actually sound correctly. People like Bach spoke in codes. I will say, the more you live with your art, the more you do develop codes. And the secrets are a very real thing. If you study the music of Dmitri Shostakovich, he had to live his whole life in a code because he was living in the Soviet Union, in Stalin's Soviet Union. And so he found ways to speak in code. In fact, he made some of the codes manifest. Like he took his name and Shostakovich, and he actually made a tune that represented the code of his name. And so when he wrote this big quartet, he said, "Oh, this is all about, my feelings about what the Germans did to the Russians in World War II." And that was the accepted Soviet thing. Any idiot, as could see that if they knew the quartet, that his name was all through the quartet, that it was autobiographic, had nothing to do with that. So I think all of us artists do have these codes that go on when they're playing. The only way to understand those codes is it not for the artists like me to just say, "Oh, well, this is what this is about, Jerry." Yeah. It means you just have to spend time with enough of the pieces. One of the problems of our time is we have to know so much. You kind of think, "Oh, I'll just learn one piece by each person. I don't only need to know this one piece." But it's really when you know a whole body of someone's work that you really start to get the full articulation, whether it's Bob Dylan or Franz Joseph Haydn. It would be that way with me as well. Does that make sense?
That made a lot of sense. And it really, I always ask these big thinkers when they're at the public library in LA, like Zizek, I go,
"Oh, you talk to Zizek? Wow."
Yeah. I go like this, McLuhan's technological determinism acquired the Menippean satirization translation of Finnegan's Wake, and he was the only one who broke the Wake code. And they go, "What the fuck?" And it is like, what you did was you taught me that Bach used codes.
Yeah.
In this no one takes the Thornton Wilder quote and puts it into the context of the year he told it, even though I say the year. They it's the other question I didn't ask you was, what's more important, conviction or compromise? How would you answer that just off the top of your head?
Well, that again is another question that leads to other questions rather than answers. Right. And that's what I love about it, because when we always divide the world in two. That's what we do as human beings. We are binary people: 2 eyes, 2 hands. We think that way. We can't think of one thing without thinking its opposite. Yeah. So that's so beautiful. What was it? Conviction and compromise.
No, this is my first question I started 40 years ago. I says, I got it from Christine McKenna. I says, "What's more important, conviction or compromise?" If you just want to answer, it's fine, or I can just explain to you whatever you want. You want to answer it?
Well, no, I have no idea what you're going to say. I'm just going to say that the idea of those, the polarization of those things, that the question itself is its own answer, because you start to realize that how important it is to have both of those things. That conviction without an ability to compromise is impossible. I will just say, as an artist, that is the game we're playing, because you have an idea, you have an initial idea, and then it's I have an improvisation. I see it absolutely clearly, just like Mozart. And then I take the pencil to the page. I still use pencil when I'm first starting the page. I put it down, and then you discover the world is not as simple as you first envisioned it. And now you engage in a lot of compromises with the devil. And you still have your conviction. How many of those compromises do you have to give up and still have your original conviction? And that is the game of creativity for me.
Yeah. It's like, it's beautiful what you said, the continuum. It's a key word that I'll retain from our discussion.
Mhm.
And I said to this guy who's a welfare lawyer, he wasn't a guy who helped welfare people. He was a lawyer on welfare. And
Okay.
I says, what's more
That's
important?
compromise.
Yeah. I says, what's more important, conviction or compromise? He says, it depends on what you mean by important. So he was the first person who took it out of the duality
Yeah.
and said, there's another key word here you're asking. And then
He didn't
in
seize on the word what, huh?
well, and then this was my second big question ever I've asked is ambition based more on fear or joy? And then people would, they always go fear. Okay, so then I saw William Friedkin,
Mhm.
and he said, the director, and he says, in Hollywood, it has nothing to do with skill or luck. It's all ambition. So, in your accomplishments, you've accomplished a lot. You got a great bio on your website. It's beautiful. And
Mhm.
I'm proud to be able to talk with you. How do you rate those three elements in your accomplishments? Luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
I guess, but if I don't think of it as the word ambition as much as compulsion, to do it. But I
Compulsion.
think that's the I always tell my students, do not go into music unless by not going into music your life would be miserable.
Yeah.
I'm kind of paraphrasing Rabbi Hillel, who kind of put the golden rule in the negative. That which is hateful to you, do not do that to another. And that was his keen understanding of human nature. And I think for me that's how it was the realization always how miserable I'd be and not feeling fulfilled in life to have tapped my potential. I
Yeah.
don't call it ambition that way, but I think that's been the most important part. The luck, I don't think I don't think of myself as having particular luck. I always think of the things that I wasn't lucky in getting. I wanted to be at one time, I always saw myself as being one of the, top symphonic composers and having works performed by all the major orchestras in the country. And that I have not had the luck to do that, nor have I had the luck to be the next John Williams in film music. I haven't had that, skill. I don't think I had the skill of most of my colleagues growing up. I think I had a basic talent, but I don't think I was particularly talented in a way people recognize talent. I think my real talent, and you hear this a lot with other people who stick around a lot, it was endurance. The fact that I just kept on it. When even if you're an idiot, if you just keep doing something long enough, you start to go into the surface. You can't help it. And that's what I liked about Malcolm Gladwell's
Yeah.
talk, because we are so enamored of the prodigy. Our
Yeah.
whole American culture has a love affair with the youth and the
Yeah.
prodigy, and we celebrate, and that's really what we like the best. That's why
Yeah.
we only like our sports stars. We want to get rid of them. We want to get rid of people as soon as they're older, and it's like we're missing the whole point. It's
Yeah.
like all the interesting stuff comes later when you know what to do with it, and that takes a lifetime to figure out for me. So that's why I love Beethoven, but I really love late Beethoven. I love
Yeah.
Mahler's early symphony, but it's his later symphonies I really like the best. And I feel that way about Shakespeare too.
Yeah.
Hamlet's great, but King Lear, my God, you know.
Wow.
So
That's really a good point. And it flips the Woody Allen line where the woman the fan goes up to him in a movie and she goes, "I like your early funny films."
yeah, yeah. That's the famous quote. I liked your early work better. There's someone goes up to God. I liked your early work better. Yeah.
Okay, you've been super generous going
It's
over.
so much fun.
Last question, really fun, really quick. What gives you the most optimism?
The most optimism. The most optimism I get now are from the young people that I have in my orchestra. Um,
Yeah.
and it's not something I planned on it, because I didn't stop by being very optimistic about them at all.
Yeah.
There's so many things I don't like about the young generation coming up. I think I think they don't want to get into things in depth for the most part. I don't find I find I don't find an empathy I'd like to see with them. But what I'm finding with the young people in my orchestra is a real optimism. I'm finding time and again, they're giving their time to charitable causes that I didn't do when I was younger. They have an awareness of the world I didn't have when I was younger, and they really do. The Jewish phrase "tikkun olam." They really do feel it is their job to repair the world because it's so clear to them their parents have completely screwed it up and don't care. Yeah. And I see this with them, and then I track them. Jerry, I've been tracking them as they graduate through college and afterwards, and I'm watching them make a difference, whether they go into music or they go into medicine or they're going to business. I'm watching them, and I see they have a moral compass to what they're doing. So that does give me optimism, and I don't think, I realize that I'm working with already a very privileged group of people that are studying musical instruments. But the world gets changed not by masses and multitudes. It gets changed by a minority of people who care. And I do see that they're starting to care. Yeah. So that's how I answer that.
Yeah, it's full circle. The first question is, what's the best thing for a human being? I got that from Wilhelm Reich. He says the best thing for a human being is another human being. And you said purpose, and you've talked community the whole time. Yeah. The last question is, what gives you the most optimism? That's the question they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And he said, other people. It's like he spent his life cutting down other people. But 90% of people answer what gives you the most optimism as youth. Mm-hmm. And it's really beautiful that we have this. One guy said, what's the best thing for a human being? That we reproduce, so that we keep we got to have youth going, carrying on. Mm-hmm. And then your step back is like, watch them and monitor and say, what are they doing? So that's back to the McLuhan, the pattern recognition we studied.
I don't think indiscriminate reproduction is, to me, what would give me optimism. I don't think that I don't feel that way emotionally.
No, I know. I mean, I
really feel having young people though that are going to are going to perpetuate the conversation, the best part of the human conversation. That's what I think gives me optimism. And we need that desperately, because we're sinking to a lower common denominator that does not have the best of that conversation. When you have a lot of people in the United States of America now not thinking there's any importance to vaccines, you've got to worry. You've got to worry.
Yeah. I'll end with the McLuhan joke. The sign, they sent a message to the deep sea diver. He's down there and the boat sends him a message. He goes, surface at once, boat is sinking.
What a genius that guy was.
Yeah. Well, Russell, I hope we can continue this discussion forever and ever. It's really been an honor and a pleasure. And again, thanks to John Bishop for introducing us. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and it goes on forever and ever. Thank you so much, Russell.
It was a pleasure. And thank you for such stimulating ideas. And I also want to thank John, who is someone I've collaborated with in his wonderful films, and also shared so many of these kinds of ideas that we've talked about. Beautiful. Okay, you're so welcome. And thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Russell.
Okay. Bye-bye.